death comes closer and closer every year. It's like people I've met or had short encounters with that are no longer with us, and that list of people is growing every year.
What is it about the mountains? What is it that calls to you about the mountains?
I mean, first of all, I think we all, humankind, know this kind of like attraction to mountains and their magnitude, magnificent. But being in the mountains, that for me is about the presence of just being in the moment. And then it's the challenge.
Were you hooked from the first time, or was this something that kind of built up over time?
Well, I grew up not knowing anything about mountains. So when I would go on holidays, I would be going to the beach or maybe doing a small city trip. But the first time that I actually saw some proper mountains was in 2013 when I was 23 years old. And I quite liked the environment. I was stunned by, yeah, by those landscapes. And so my next holidays was like, I want to see that again as part of my backpacking trip to Argentina. And I was like, okay, where can I go and do like a multi-day hike and see some mountains on? And I ended up climbing Aconcagua. I think that was the moment where I was like, I really want to experience this again and again and again.
So your first mountain experience was climbing one of the 7 summits in South America?
Yeah, that's right. Mount Aconcagua, it's called.
That seems like that's a pretty intense first experience. Like, I thought you were going to say, like, I went on this 2-mile hike, saw a waterfall, turned around, came back.
In a way, it helped that I didn't know much about mountains back then because I was not expecting so much in terms of like what it had to be like and what it would have to give me, and there was no kind of like pressure. And also there was no feeling of what if I'm not good enough? What if I'm not skilled enough? Instead, I just went by, okay, what's the requirements that the expedition provider and the mountain guide put forward? Can I tick those boxes? And if I can, hey, why not do it? Instead of being like, all those people around me are better mountaineers, are more skilled, more experienced, and so on. Maybe I shouldn't be trying this. I think in a way it was good that I got into this world without much prejudice.
Okay, I get that climbing these 8,000 meter mountains is hard, right? But I don't really understand it. Is there something that you could like put in perspective of like, okay, how difficult is this really?
I think one of my most difficult moments was when I was climbing Broad Peak, which is not a very well-known 8,000 meter peak. It was my first 8,000 meter peak without bottled oxygen though. And on summit day, that feeling was like having to keep walking in a straight line after feeling like you haven't slept for maybe 2 nights in a row and having had a bottle of vodka. That's how it feels like when you're not properly acclimatized walking at high altitude. Overall, I think it's a lot of a mental game. Those 8,000 meter peak expeditions take a lot of time because you have to get to base camp first. That oftentimes is a multi-day trek, even just getting to the starting point. Then from then on, you always need to wait for a good weather window to then go and climb a little bit higher up that mountain and then come back to base camp again so that you keep pushing your body to the feeling of altitude, to the lack of oxygen, and allow for it to rest, recover, and adapt, and then you go up again when the next weather window is there. And sometimes there's avalanches in between that destroy all the effort you've made on building the route or setting up camps higher up the mountains. Sometimes there's bad weather for 2 weeks and you can't do anything about that. And then sometimes you don't feel quite ready yet, but the opportunity is there to go and push, and you need to just go grab it and force yourself up that mountain. So a lot of that is a mental challenge of being resilient and being able to adapt to what nature around you dictates.
What is the significance of doing it without oxygen?
I think climbing with or without bottled oxygen is best compared to doing Tour de France on an e-bike or a normal bike. So it's a huge difference. Like if you're doing Tour de France on an e-bike, I think most of us would be able to do it. Having to do it on a regular bike, not so sure. And so the reason why that's so different is because at altitude, you've got lower air pressure. So with lower air pressure, you've got lower levels of oxygen around you. And that means that at an altitude of 8,000 meters, you have less than 1/3 of the amount of oxygen around you that you'd normally have at sea level, approximately. So even if you wouldn't do any exercise, and actually you're climbing up there, within 24 hours or maybe 48 hours, you would, generally speaking, die because of the lack of oxygen. And that's why also that altitude is called the death zone in mountaineering. Your blood circulation does not work that well anymore. You'll have much colder extremities like your hands or your feet. You'll be hyperventilating, and thus you'll be inhaling significant amounts of really cold air that will cool you out from inside, no matter how warm your downsuit is, and so on. And so when you use supplemental oxygen, you will alleviate and greatly reduce all those factors and bring down the perceived altitude of the mountain. So even if you're standing on top of like an 8,000 meter peak, the perceived altitude for your body might only be 7,000 or 6,000 or even 5,000, depending on what oxygen system you use.
So it's a huge difference in that regard. Do people who climb it without oxygen kind of look down on the people who climb it with oxygen? It's kind of like, yeah, but you did it with oxygen.
I think there's a few different camps and there's a few different arguments to be had. Like, of course, there's those purists that say, do it without oxygen or don't do it at all. Then there's those who say, well, if you don't do it with oxygen, you're a risk to other people, or you can't help that much if there's an emergency because there's no backup system of oxygen when something goes wrong and when you get altitude sickness and so on. So safety is a concern. And then, there's those who are saying, look, it might be a nice achievement for you personally, but I don't think it's worth taking the risks because, especially with altitude, you oftentimes don't realize you're beyond that limit of where your body can take it. And once you've crossed that line, there's no real saving you anymore. So only to say, oh, well, I've done it without vital oxygen, why would I take the risk?
So you've done all of the 7 summits. The 7 summits is the highest mountain on every continent, right? How come you wanted to do that? What motivated you to go for all 7?
It kind of was just unfolding with my holidays. So the first of 7 summits was I wanted to go to Argentina, go backpacking. Then I was working a lot in Africa, and my boss told me, hey, why don't you save our company and yourself some money for flights and just spend your holidays in Tanzania next to our customer in Kenya and go climb Kilimanjaro. How could I say no? And just like that, with every holiday, one of the 7 summits was added to my mountains climbed, and eventually I was like, I gotta go and see Antarctica. I gotta go and climb Mount VinZant as well and complete the 7 summits.
How do you get this much time off? That's the one question that I was wondering, because I know you work a full-time job. Like, how do you get this much time off to do these things?
Negotiation is a good skill to have, for sure. I realized the more passionate I am about something, the more do other people want to see me do it and succeed. So if I was to ask for 2 months off because I want to go on a beach holiday and lay by the sea, no one's going to say yes. But if I'm saying, look, I deeply care about climbing K2, or I deeply care about going on this solo expedition to the South Pole, and I'll put a lot of time and effort into this, and also I'll be giving back when I come back, or give my best before as well. People are like, I want to be there for you and I want to support you on your journey. The second thing I would like to add to that is I've met so many people who say, I would love to do it, but I don't have the time now. And then they wait for the right moment. And then years go by and there's never the right moment because there's always something. And so if you wait for the right moment, you'll wait forever.
But why then, like, why do you think, is this just your nature? Like, why do you do this and other people do not? Right? Because I think that everybody would kind of agree with those sentiments, but people just don't do it. So what is it, like, how do you do it and other people Like, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it next week.
I think one thing is commitment. So I make that conscious decision, like it's a binary yes or no decision. Like, yes, I commit to making this my goal, and therefore I will make it work. Or it's no, it's nice to have, but I'm not committed to prioritize it enough. So I think that's the number one thing, like really committing to a goal and being binary about it, not being a maybe and not being like, let me see and let me try, but being like, yes, I will make it happen. That's the number one most important thing. And then I think what adds to that is I have kind of like learning from my first and early experience, adopted that mindset that you don't need to be special to do something special. You don't need to be like the people who did it before you to do the same thing. Like, instead of trying to be either that unicorn or to be a copy of that huge, big, daunting adventurer, just be yourself and just do it the way that it works best for you. And I found that to be super helpful, because then you stop comparing yourself, you stop getting derailed by looking at others, and you stop, maybe thinking, oh, is it now an imposter syndrome? Am I maybe not that special? Am I maybe not good enough? Am I maybe whatever? And you don't have any excuses anymore. It's just about like, okay, I am who I am, and I've got what it takes if I just put my mind to it. And I think that also underlines the point that the hardest part of my expeditions is oftentimes getting to the starting line. Once you're at the starting line, 80% of the expedition are done. The execution is the remaining 20%.
So when did you start? So you were climbing all these mountains, got bored climbing all these mountains. When did you start doing the polar expeditions, crossing the poles, that kind of stuff?
End of 2018, I was sitting in the office like a gray, rainy afternoon. It was like, I'd kind of like to go on the expedition. But as you said, another mountain feels a bit repetitive at this point. I've climbed so many, it would be nice to learn something new and push myself. And I remembered that when I was in Antarctica for the first time in 2017, that was the first time I heard about polar expeditions. And that came into my mind again. So I started Googling polar expeditions. I wrote a couple of messages, did some research, and a few weeks later, I stood on cross-country skis for the first time in my life and learned the art and craft of polar travel and polar expeditions. And a year later, I did my big trip across Antarctica from the outer coastline all the way to the South Pole, and set a world record on cross-country skis. And it was also a great way to learn about self-sufficiency and doing things all alone eventually.
Is it how would you compare it to kind of mountains? Would you say it's more difficult or less difficult or just different? Like, how would you compare it?
Quite different. I mean, from the outside it looks so similar. You've got snow and ice, you've got remote places and hostile environments. But on the mountains, you spend a lot of time resting and recovering, waiting for good weather, and so on. And so the actual climbing activities on those big mountain expeditions are quite short. But when they happen, they can be very taxing and exposed and dangerous, and you are in a far more risky environment. On polar travel, you have really long days. Every day is a day. There's no rest days. There's no let's retreat and recover and go back out again in a couple of days and so on. Like every single day you have a full day of work, so to speak. And all the little details matter so much. In polar travel, you think about, okay, how many seconds per break or per changing my layers do I lose if I have a Velcro on top of my zipper of my jacket? Like, that's the type of detail you get into. It's like, okay, I will need to pre-cut my protein bars or energy bars before I head out onto the expedition, because they will be so frozen. It will take me too much time to warm them up and even chew them if I don't do that in advance. Like, you think about the tiniest details that will cost you so much time. over a 2-month period. So very different, and both have their challenges in their own right.
Well, why is the time such a like? Why would you do that? Just because you don't want to stop, essentially, or like, what's the reason that like time is such an important thing?
Typically on polar expeditions, you want to go unsupported, which means that from day one of the start of your expedition, everything you will need to have with you to make it to the end of your expedition has to be on your sled that you drag behind you. And the more you need, the heavier the sled gets. And so it makes a huge difference if you're carrying or pulling a sled that weighs 100 kilos, or if you're pulling a sled that weighs 130 kilos. So you want to minimize the weight, but you want to make it. So you need to have enough food, enough fuel, enough everything. And the faster you go, the shorter the time you will need to get from A to B. So it's a matter of finding the sweet spot between minimal weight for maximum speed without, risking that you will run out of food, fuel, or have an incident in between that you can't resolve with the supplies that you have.
Are you ready for some harder / listener submitted questions?
Sure.
What was the scariest experience that you've had?
I guess one mountain that had a few scary experiences was K2. I remember one night we're sleeping on Camp 3, and I was sharing a tent with a climbing partner, and late at night he woke me up and he was like, "Hey, we need to get down immediately, like there's been so much snow accumulating and it sounds like we'll have avalanche risk very soon if we don't get down right now, like that might be it." Like that's the moment where you're like fast awake. Luckily, turned out it was a lot of snowdrift, but no fresh snow, and so we were safe. But like that moment when you wake up and you're like in shock, you won't forget quickly. And just a few days later on that same expedition, we were on the summit push. We're going for the summit, and K2 is known for the bottleneck section, which is the most dangerous section of the whole mountain, and it's so close to the summit. It's just the last couple of hundreds of meters on the final day after being out there for like 6-7 weeks, and we had to turn around right in the middle of that section, in the middle of the night, because again, there was such deep snow that there were snow slabs coming down, and they almost pulled one of the climbers down that was going far ahead, and there was a moment you're like, okay, I want to make it to the top, but I don't want to lose my life. Now's the moment to turn around.
Is it harder to go up or harder to go down?
Harder on the knees to go down, but definitely takes so much longer to go up.
But do people get in situations where they like put so much effort into going up that like, oh, how are you going to get down now?
That is a real danger. The majority of people who have died in the mountains died on their descent, and I've unfortunately had to witness that last summer. I was climbing Nanga Parbat. I only had base camp support, so I was kind of on my own on the mountain, but there were 3 other climbers who about the same time as me summited, and we all kind of like connected and said like, hey, let's go down now before it's too late. And one of those climbers got altitude sick, probably already on the way up, but it really emerged on the way down, and eventually we couldn't save him, and he died. And that's the moments where we realize it's a fine line between, summiting, nice, okay, good, but losing your life, that is a whole different thing. And yeah, that's when you realize you got to be extra careful. You can't push to your limit in the mountains. I always say, in order to go above and beyond my limits, metaphorically speaking, I always have to stay below my limits.
When you set out on one, right, for yourself and for other people, is it really in your mind that like, oh, I'm not coming back?
I wouldn't go out if I thought I wouldn't come back. I'm not suicidal. I'm not going there because I'm like, oh, I might kill myself in the process, but let me try anyway. I'm going there feeling confident enough that I will be able to make the right calls to come back home safely. Because that's what this is all about. I want to come back home safely and not I wanna I wanna summit a mountain at all costs, and if it costs my life, I'm happy to give my life away for it. But having said that, death comes closer and closer every year. Like, even just looking back at, my footage from last summer, even though none of those have been people I've known before, it's like people I've met or had short encounters with that are no longer with us. And that list of people is growing every year.
Do you think that you would stop because of that?
Yeah. And I think it's important to remind yourself of doing that. We call it the summit fever when you forget about everything else and just go for the summit and just try to push on and push on and push on, and just hope for it to turn out well in the end. But I think it takes a lot of mental strength and a lot of like self-confidence to say, no, today's not the day. Because at that moment where you're saying, no, today's not the day, you're still okay. So you'll always be like, but maybe it could have worked out. Maybe I could have made it. You will never know because at that moment you'll still feel okay. So that takes a lot of like self-discipline, a lot of like mental strength, a lot of self-confidence. Like also people who have to tell, family and friends, media, sponsors, oftentimes big parties involved. Like, hey, I wasn't feeling it. I turned around and I'm still okay. Like, I'm standing here in perfect health with all my fingers, my nose, and my toes. Then why did I turn around? Well, because I wasn't feeling it. Okay. You have to be able to do that and to say that and to stand up for that.
Slightly lighter subject. Which one of the mountains did you climb was your favorite? Which one was like, oh, I really like that one?
Even though I talked so negatively about that, like K2 will always be special for me. Um, we had the most beautiful summit push. We were only like a group of maybe 20 climbers at whole day on the mountain, perfect views, perfect weather, and it's just such an iconic mountain to climb with this, yeah, stunning triangular shape that you see from afar. I will always love K2, I think.
Which one was the hardest? Which one would you say like, oh, that was the hardest one? That was tough.
Um, Funny enough, Broad Peak, which is an absolutely unassuming 8,000-meter peak, was the hardest for me because we did a very early push to the summit in terrible conditions. I was not well acclimatized, and just everything was so hard on that summit ridge, which stretches on for what felt like forever. So it doesn't need to be a difficult mountain to be a difficult climb for you personally, is what I realized.
Was there one that you were like, that one wasn't that hard? Which one would you say was kind of overrated in its toughness?
I think in terms of toughness, Nanga Parbat is called the most difficult one of the 8,000-meter peaks. It's very technical and very steep and so on. But I feel like commercialization of 8,000-meter peak climbing, which means you've usually got multiple expedition teams, you share rope fixing, you've got well-established camps and ground setting and so on, made it quite easy so that I don't feel like Nanga Parbat, even though it's supposed to be the most difficult of the 8,000-meter peaks, is a technical challenge anymore.
Does that ruin things for people? Do you feel like that's ruining the sport? Or is this is how it is now?
I guess it adds to the popularity of the sports. I think what we're seeing in the Himalayas right now is what we've seen in, say, the Alps in the years before. Like, back in the days, no one would climb them at all. Then some explorers would want to climb them, and then all of a sudden everybody's climbing them. And I think we are at a point where, to some extent, this is happening in the Himalayas as well. Um, and in a way, it's okay. It's great that this is becoming more accessible for people. At the same time, I think we need to be cautious to make sure that even though more people go, they are still sufficiently prepared.
Um, what's next?
I don't have a bucket list of projects or goals to tick off. I guess it's more about like creating new experiences, learning, developing myself. Um, yeah, but I suppose it's safe to say that I am going to do some more polar and mountain expeditions in the future. But I guess ultimately, like the main goal for me is more to, yeah, pursue a life well lived, the art of striving well, the art of like using my potential. Um, and I guess that's a journey that will never end.
Do you feel like you'll kind of continue down this, I'll just use the word for lack of a better word, like more extreme thing? Or do you ever see yourself like, I want my next challenge is to go to all the buffets in Las Vegas or something like that? Do you ever feel like will it always be something like this, or do you think it will ever kind of like change into something more mundane, for lack of a better word?
I actually love the balance. Like, I think if I was just in the bubble of explorers and expeditioners, I wouldn't be happy. I like to like step into that world, but then to step out of that world again and be, in the world of business and the city life and so on. For me, it's super nice to have that balance of different worlds. And so I don't see myself as like just focused on the extreme for the next however many years or completely stepping out of it. But let's
That's
see.
that's I miss this one a little bit, and this is one where they just use a couple of words, but I think I know what they mean. And the question is just, what's the trade-off, right? Because like, everything is a give and take. You do this, you don't get to do that. Is there like, what's the trade-off for doing expeditions like this?
I think one big thing is the time. So I can only use my time once. And I spend most of my time that I'm not working, on those expeditions instead of doing extended holidays with my friends. So my trips with like my kind of like city friends become shorter and shorter. It's more like long weekends rather than 2 weeks of holidays together. Um, Money, I guess. It's an expensive hobby to have. So I spend a lot of money on gear, on travel, on equipment, and so on. But I'm happy to do so. And on summit day, that feeling was like having to keep walking in a straight line after feeling like you haven't slept for maybe 2 nights in a row and having had a bottle of vodka. That's how it feels like when you're not properly acclimatized walking at high altitude. Overall, I think it's a lot of a mental game. Those 8,000-meter peak expeditions take a lot of time because you have to get to base camp first. That oftentimes is a multi-day trek, even just getting to the starting point. Then from then on, you always need to wait for a good weather window to then go and climb a little bit higher up that mountain and then come back to base camp again so that you keep pushing your body um, to the feeling of altitude, to the lack of oxygen, and allow for it to rest, recover, and adapt, and then you go up again when the next weather window is there. And sometimes there's avalanches in between that destroy all the effort you've made on building the route or setting up camps higher up the mountains. Sometimes there's bad weather for 2 weeks and you can't do anything about that. And then sometimes you don't feel quite ready yet, but the opportunity is there to go and push, and you need to just go grab it and force yourself up that mountain. So a lot of that is a mental challenge of being resilient